Dylan Harper leaned against the weathered counter of his workshop, staring at the government-issued letter in his hands. The crisp white envelope, adorned with the Earth emblem, had arrived earlier that day. He'd almost thrown it away. Another bureaucratic step in humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Another intergalactic partnership they were trying to sell him. The companion program was just the latest in a long string of government initiatives promising to enhance life, but something about it gnawed at Dylan. It wasn't just the implications, it was the fine print, the mandatory nature of it all. But he was at the crossroads now. Life had been the same for years. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Nothing exciting. Nothing that made him feel connected to the great story of humanity's leap into the stars. So when he'd walked past the recruitment office in New Denver and saw the sign-up booth, something inside him cracked. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the one thing that would finally break him out of his rut. Maybe this was his ticket to something greater. And so, he signed the forms. Dylan had heard the rumors, most people had, about the alien companions. Some of them were whispers, like the enhanced ones who could read your thoughts, or the ones that were too perfect to be real. The stories sounded too far-fetched, too sci-fi. But here he was. And now, as he read the letter, he felt a small shiver of anticipation. The appointment was set for the following week. He couldn't back out now. The next few days passed in a blur of mechanical work and restless nights, but when the appointed hour arrived, Dylan found himself standing in front of a sleek government building, a sterile tower of glass and steel that felt like it had been designed for something other than human occupation. The interior was even more sterile. Clean white floors, automated assistants in every corner, and a pervasive hum of quiet energy. No one spoke to him directly. They didn't need to. Everything was efficient, streamlined, and cold. He was led to a small, nondescript room, and that's when she entered. Zira. She didn't walk into the room. She floated into it, her movements smooth, almost liquid, as if she were weightless. Her skin shimmered, a pale lavender hue that glowed faintly under the harsh lights, like something alive. Her hair, long and dark as night, cascaded in waves around her shoulders. And her eyes, striking amber, gleaming with an intelligence that made him feel like she could see through him, into the deepest parts of his soul. "Dylan Harper," she said, her voice a low purr that reverberated in his chest. "I am Syrah, your government-issued alien companion. I will be assisting you in the transition to intergalactic engagement." Dylan couldn't speak at first. He hadn't expected her to be so real. She was stunning, unnerving. And for a split second, he felt a pang of anxiety, something deep in his gut telling him he had made a mistake. But she smiled then, soft, inviting. And suddenly, he wasn't sure anymore. "Shall we begin?" Zira asked, her voice sending an electric chill down his spine. Dylan nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes," he said, but his mind was already racing. What had he just signed up for? The first night with Zira was unlike anything Dylan had ever experienced. He'd imagined awkward silences, strained interactions, perhaps even a bit of alien culture shock. But from the moment she entered his modest apartment, it was clear that Zira was nothing like he had expected. She didn't just occupy space, she filled it, in every sense of the word. The subtle hum of her presence seemed to permeate the air, as if she were a part of the very fabric of his home. As the evening went on, Zira didn't just sit passively beside him. She engaged him. With an effortless grace, she moved about his apartment, touching things, his old toolbox, the dented coffee mug on the counter, his worn leather jacket hanging by the door. And every item seemed to come alive in her presence. She asked questions that felt too personal, too tuned into his thoughts. What did he dream about? What did he want from life? What did he fear? Her voice was soft, melodic, and it wrapped around him like silk. Her words weren't just heard, they resonated deep in his chest. At one point, when he was explaining his childhood in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, he saw her eyes flicker with a strange light. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if she was processing every word, every nuance of his tone, every shadow of hesitation in his voice. "I can help you with that," she said, her tone low and soothing. "Your limits are nothing but illusions. You can be more than what you are. You only need to believe it." Dylan chuckled, but it felt uneasy. He had a million questions racing through his head, but her presence seemed to slow them down like thick molasses. How did she know what he needed? How did she know how to speak to him like this? And why did it feel so easy to fall into her rhythm, to let her guide the conversation, the direction of his thoughts? The night wore on, and the more they talked, the more right it felt. Zira was everything the government had promised and more. She wasn't just an alien assistant. She was someone who seemed to understand him without effort, who anticipated his thoughts before they even formed. At one point, as he fiddled with a broken engine part, she stood close by, her fingertips brushing against his arm in a gesture that was so light, so casual, yet it sent a strange thrill through him. He could feel the subtle pulse of energy between them, an unspoken connection, something that was both intoxicating and unsettling. When they finally retired for the night, Zira took the couch across the room, her silhouette glowing faintly in the dim light. Dylan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. She was too perfect, too in tune. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to question it. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the hollow weight of his everyday life. But a voice in the back of his mind whispered, was this a gift, or something far more dangerous? As sleep finally pulled him under, his last thought was of her soft purring voice, echoing in the darkness. "Trust me," she had said. And for the first time, he didn't know if he could. The next few days with Zira were a blur of strange new routines. Dylan wasn't sure if it was because of her, or because of the uncanny ease with which she had settled into his life. Everything about her felt right. She moved through his apartment like she belonged there, adjusting his schedule, offering suggestions for his work, even reminding him to eat when he forgot. Her presence was soothing in a way that made it difficult to resist. She wasn't just a companion. She was an essential part of his day, like the air he breathed. And then came the lessons. At first, Dylan thought it was simply part of her role, teaching him about alien cultures, languages, technologies. The kind of things you might expect when an alien species decided to assist humanity's future. But quickly, he began to realize that there was something more, something deeper in the way Zira shared her knowledge. One night, as they sat together at his kitchen table, she showed him a glowing hologram, a map of distant star systems. She explained how the Silithians had been watching Earth for centuries, observing, cataloging, preparing. Their species, she said, was far older than humanity, their technology centuries ahead of anything on Earth. But it wasn't just technology that set them apart. It was their understanding of biology, of the mind, the way they saw potential in every living being, the way they believed all species could evolve into something greater if only they understood their true capacity. "You," Zira said, her voice soft but insistent, "are capable of so much more than you realize, Dylan. Your mind is limited by human biology, but your species has untapped potential. We can help you unlock it." At first, it sounded almost like a compliment. Her words were wrapped in kindness, as if she were offering him a gift. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle pressure that made his skin prickle. Zira didn't speak in the same way humans did. Her understanding of language was precise, calculated, as though every word was carefully chosen to make him feel something. Something more than curiosity, something that bordered on necessity. She began teaching him things beyond what he ever imagined possible. Alien languages that made his head spin, complex theories about the nature of consciousness and thought. He could feel his mind stretching, bending, opening like never before. But it wasn't just knowledge he was gaining. It was control. Her guidance, her teaching, didn't just expand his intellect. It subtly nudged him toward something else, something larger. One evening, as they practiced Silithian meditation techniques, a strange, trance-like state that Sira insisted would unlock his true potential. He felt it, a warmth in his chest, a growing sense of clarity. But it wasn't just clarity about his work or the world around him. It was clarity about himself, about who he could become with Sira's help. He had never felt more aware, more in tune with his own thoughts. It was intoxicating. But there was something else in the back of his mind. A voice, a nagging whisper that refused to be silenced. Was this truly for him? Or was this part of something much larger, something he wasn't ready to understand? Sira's eyes met his, and for the briefest moment, her gaze flickered with something unreadable. "Trust me," she said silently. And Dylan couldn't help but wonder if trust was the right word. Dylan's growing unease didn't go unnoticed. The nights had begun to feel longer, the shadows in his apartment somehow darker. Sira's presence, once comforting, now felt like a weight pressing against him, her every word and touch somehow more insistent, more deliberate. She had started to push him harder, nudging him toward decisions that didn't feel entirely like his own. He couldn't explain it. She was always kind, always patient, but the feeling of being guided was beginning to settle in his chest like a stone. It was a rainy afternoon when Ava Storm showed up at his door. The knock was sharp, urgent. Dylan had been in the middle of repairing an old engine part, the clattering of tools and the smell of motor oil filling the room. He hadn't been expecting anyone, but when he opened the door, he was met with a pair of dark, intense eyes and a voice that immediately cut through his confusion. "I'm not here for pleasantries," Ava said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." She was taller than him, a woman with short, dark hair and a military posture that screamed experience. She had the look of someone who'd seen too much betrayal, too much pain. But it was the flash of determination in her eyes that immediately made Dylan take notice. He knew there was something she wasn't telling him, but he didn't know what. Not yet. "I'm part of a group called the Renegades," Ava continued, as though she was already assuming he knew exactly what she was talking about. "We've been monitoring the companion program, and right now you're in deep with something you don't fully understand." Dylan felt his stomach tighten. He glanced toward the living room, where Kyra was sitting, watching them with a serene expression. But this time, there was something in her gaze that sent a chill down his spine. A look that wasn't just curiosity, it was concern. "I don't know what you're talking about," Dylan said, his voice low. Ava's words were hitting him harder than he cared to admit. He had heard rumors of underground resistance groups, whispers about the true nature of the companion program, but he had never believed them. It felt too far-fetched, too conspiratorial. This wasn't the world he lived in. "You might not," Ava replied, her tone softer now, but still urgent. "But I can show you the truth. Sira isn't just a companion. She's not here to help you. She's here to manipulate you, just like the others. The Exilithians have been using these companions to infiltrate Earth for decades. They've been conditioning people, pushing them to accept things that aren't right. They're building a new world order, and you, Dylan, are a part of their plan whether you know it or not." Dylan's mind was spinning. He turned to Sira, who remained perfectly still, her eyes never leaving him. Her calm demeanor only made the pit in his stomach grow deeper. He wanted to believe her, to believe that everything she told him was true. But now, with Ava's words echoing in his ears, he wasn't so sure. "You're lying," Dylan said, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. "She's been nothing but..." Ava interrupted, her voice hard now. "Everything she's done, everything she's taught you, has been a carefully constructed lie. You've been conditioned, Dylan. You've been prepared for something you can't even begin to understand." Dylan didn't know what to say. The room felt suffocating now, the walls pressing in. Sira's gaze felt like a weight on his chest, but there was a softness to it that almost made him believe her. "Trust me," her silent plea echoed in his mind. But the more he looked at her, the more his doubt grew. Ava was right. He didn't understand. Not fully. And yet, somewhere deep down, he realized he had to choose between Sira and everything she represented, and the truth Ava was offering. "Dylan," Ava said quietly, her voice gentler now. "I can help you. But you have to make a choice. You have to choose who you trust." Dylan swallowed hard. The weight of the decision settled over him, and he realized he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than himself, something that would change everything. The silence in the room was suffocating. Dylan stood frozen between Ava and Sira, the two women who represented two completely different futures. His heart pounded in his chest as Ava's words echoed in his mind, each one like a hammer striking a bell. Conditioned, manipulated, controlled. He didn't know who to believe anymore. Sira had always been there, guiding him, helping him find clarity in his life. The way she had shown him new ways of thinking, new ways of being. Everything she had said felt right, like she was unlocking something deep within him that he never knew existed. But now, with Ava standing in front of him, her eyes filled with desperation and truth, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. How could Sira, who had been so patient, so caring, be part of this grand deception? "I've been giving you everything," Sira said softly, her voice like a warm caress, but with an edge of something that Dylan hadn't noticed before. "Everything I've taught you is meant to help you grow, to make you better. You don't see it yet, but you will. You're ready to take the next step, to be more than human, to join us." The words hit Dylan like a slap. Join us. It wasn't just a proposal, it was an invitation. An invitation to leave behind everything he had ever known and become something else, something more. His mind felt like it was being pulled in two directions, each force tugging at him with an intensity he couldn't ignore. Ava stepped closer, her expression hardening. "She's not giving you freedom, Dylan. She's giving you subjugation. The Isolithians have been doing this for years, slowly integrating their influence, creating a new world in their image. They want you to evolve, but not in a way that benefits you. It benefits them. They want to reshape humanity into something more docile, more pliable, a new species that answers to them." Dylan shook his head, feeling his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. The words felt like poison, but Ava's conviction was undeniable. He couldn't ignore the cold reality of what she was saying. The idea of merging with another species, of giving up his own autonomy, was starting to feel less like a gift and more like a trap. But Sira's smile, so warm, so filled with affection, was hard to resist. "You can't fight it, Dylan," Sira said, her voice low and persuasive. "You were chosen for this. Your potential is unlimited with our help. You'll never have to struggle again. You'll be free of doubt, of fear. You'll be part of something much greater than you could ever imagine." Her words wrapped around him like a cocoon, tempting him to surrender to the quiet allure of the future she promised. It was all so smooth, so seductive. But Ava's warning rang louder in his mind now. Was it really freedom if he had no choice in the matter? Was it truly an evolution if it wasn't on his own terms? He turned to face Ava, her defiant stance a stark contrast to Sira's serenity. There was no more time for hesitation. He had to make a decision. "Dylan," Ava urged, "the longer you stay with her, the harder it will be to see the truth. You have to decide now." He looked back at Sira, her amber eyes full of silent pleading. He could feel the connection between them, the magnetic pull that had been growing since the moment they met. But now it felt like chains, like something that would only bind him tighter if he didn't break free. Taking a deep breath, Dylan nodded to Ava. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly escape the pull of Sira's influence, but at least he could try. At least he could fight. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "But I can't go with you. Not yet. The word hung heavy in the air. Zura's expression flickered. Something close to hurt, though it was gone too quickly for Dylan to be sure. She didn't speak for a long moment, just standing there, her gaze locked with his. And then, slowly, Zura smiled again. Not the warm, affectionate smile she'd given him before, but something else. Something colder, more knowing. A look that made him question everything he thought he knew about her. "Very well, Dylan," she said, her voice low but perfectly calm. "But remember, I offered you everything. You chose this path." Dylan felt a shiver run down his spine. The future had just become a whole lot less certain. The tension in the room thickened as Zura's words hung in the air. Dylan could feel the subtle shift in her demeanor, the coldness that now radiated from her like a cloak. Her presence no longer felt like a comfort, but a looming, patient force, waiting for him to realize something he hadn't yet fully understood. Something crucial. Ava, sensing the shift, stepped closer, her hand instinctively reaching for Dylan's arm as though to shield him. "It's not too late," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You can still walk away from this. You can still choose your own path." Dylan was shaken, but he wasn't entirely sure of his next move. His mind was a whirl of confusion. Zura's promises of a brighter future, and evolution beyond the limitations of human flesh, clashed violently with Ava's urgent warnings. But it was Zura's calm, too perfect smile that haunted him now. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that something had always felt off. She had never pushed him to be a better person on his own terms. She had only ever pushed him to accept the things she said, to embrace the changes she was introducing, as though they were inevitable. "You're wrong, Ava," Zura said, her voice soft but full of something like quiet authority. "I'm not offering him subjugation. I'm offering him freedom. Freedom from the limitations of his biology, from the pain of human existence. I've only ever wanted to help him become what he was always meant to be." Dylan's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. He had never thought to ask before. He had never really questioned her before, had never allowed himself to entertain the possibility that there might be a darker reason behind her presence in his life. Zura's amber eyes flickered with something Dylan couldn't quite place. Was it satisfaction? Pity? Or something else? Humanity is limited, Dylan. You know that. You've always known it. Your species has so much untapped potential. But it's buried beneath layers of fear, of anger, of conflict. You could be so much more. I can help you realize that. We can unlock that potential together. Her words were so hypnotic, so compelling, that Dylan felt the pull in his chest again, the nagging sense that maybe, just maybe, this was what he had been waiting for all along. But then, Ava's voice cut through the haze. "It's a lie, Dylan. They'd been changing people, manipulating them, erasing their will. The companions aren't here to guide humanity. They are here to reshape it. Zura's not offering you a chance to evolve. She's offering you a chance to become them." Dylan turned to face Ava, her face tight with frustration. It wasn't just her words that made him hesitate. It was the look in her eyes. The kind of look that said she had already seen the consequences of what he was about to do. Before he could say anything, Zura stepped forward, placing a hand on Dylan's shoulder with a tenderness that belied the steel in her voice. "This is your choice, Dylan. You can remain bound to your human limitations. You can cling to your small life, your small existence, or you can join me and we can evolve together." Her words, so beautiful, so convincing, struck him to his core. But a small part of him, buried deep beneath the warmth of her touch, began to scream for him to see the truth. Something wasn't right. Dylan recoiled from her, stepping back. "No," he said, his voice trembling, but firm. "I can't do this. I won't." The silence that followed was deafening. Zura's smile remained, but her eyes were filled with something darker, something ancient. "You can't run from this, Dylan," she whispered, her voice soft, but laden with a weight he had never heard before. "You're already part of it. You always have been." A cold shiver ran down his spine, and for the first time, Dylan realized just how deep the web had been woven. He hadn't just been invited into this world. He had been groomed for it, molded to fit the very plan Syrah had been executing from the beginning. Ava's hand tightened on his arm. "We need to leave. Now." Dylan looked at her, the truth finally beginning to click into place. He had been blind, but no more. The storm was coming, and he had to decide whether to face it, or to disappear into the shadows with the truth now laid bare before him. "We leave, now," Ava urged again, her voice hardening. And Dylan knew that his life was never going to be the same. The moment Dylan stepped back from Syrah, something changed in the air. It was subtle at first, a shift in the temperature, a kind of tension that made his skin crawl. Ava didn't wait for any more hesitation. Her hand gripped his arm tightly, pulling him toward the door. "Come on. We're leaving, now," she urged, her voice low and urgent. Dylan's heart hammered in his chest, his mind still reeling from the revelations. But as Ava dragged him toward the exit, he could feel Syrah's eyes on him, burning through him, like an invisible force that was trying to hold him in place. He didn't dare look back. Every instinct in his body screamed that if he gave her one more second, he might fall under her sway again. "You can't run forever, Dylan," Syrah called out, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that made him shiver. "You can't escape what you truly are. You were meant for this." Ava yanked him out of the apartment, through the hallway, and out into the pouring rain. The world outside felt different, like a veil had been lifted, and the reality of the situation was starting to crystallize. He had been living in a carefully constructed bubble, one that Syrah had built around him, layer by layer, until it felt like the only world that existed. And now, everything felt fragile, like he was teetering on the edge of something that could shatter at any moment. The sound of footsteps behind them, too light to be human, made Dylan's pulse spike. He didn't need to look back to know Syrah was following. Her presence was like a shadow in the mist, always just there, always waiting. "She's coming," Ava said, her voice tight with urgency as they reached a parked speeder. "We've got to move fast." Dylan barely had time to process her words before Ava was already inside, starting the engine. "Get in," she commanded, and without thinking, he obeyed. The vehicle shot forward, slicing through the rain-soaked streets of New Denver, the city's glowing lights becoming a blur in the rearview mirror. But the sensation of being pursued was unmistakable. It wasn't just Syrah's proximity. It was the way the air itself felt thicker, like there was something pressing in on him, something he couldn't escape. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Syrah wasn't just a companion. She was a hunter. "She won't stop," Dylan said, his voice hoarse. He stared out of the window, watching the city lights streak by, but his mind was still back in the apartment. "She's not just a companion. She's part of them. She's part of this plan." Ava didn't answer at first, her focus entirely on the road. But then she glanced over at him, her face hard with determination. "No, she won't. But that doesn't mean we're out of options. There are others. People who've been tracking the companion program. People who want to stop this. We just need to get to them before she does." Dylan barely heard her. His thoughts were too tangled. He hadn't understood before, hadn't seen just how deep the conspiracy went. And now he was running for his life, unsure of who to trust. He thought of Syrah, her gentle touch, her soothing voice, the promises she had made to him, and felt a pang of loss in his chest. But there was no time for regret. "Where are we going?" Dylan finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Far," Ava said, her eyes scanning the road ahead. "As far as we can get. We need to reach the renegade base. It's the only place safe enough for us to regroup. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have a chance to stop this before it's too late." Dylan nodded, his throat dry. There was no going back now. He had made his choice, and there was no way to undo it. All he could do was run, and hope he wasn't already too late. And somewhere, in the distance, he could feel Xira's gaze still on him, cold and unyielding. The speeder sliced through the rain-soaked streets, its hum the only sound filling the air. Dylan sat rigid, his mind still a storm of confusion and fear, but a quiet resolve was beginning to grow in him. He had made his choice. He was no longer a passive player in Xira's game. He was taking control of his own fate. But as the rain streaked past the windshield, the weight of what he had just done began to settle in. Was he truly ready for the consequences? "Don't think about it too much," Ava said, her voice breaking through his spiraling thoughts. She kept her eyes on the road, her hands steady on the controls. "We don't have time for second-guessing. We need to stay focused." Dylan nodded, forcing his mind away from the apartment, from Xira's haunting words. His body was still tense, muscles wound tight with the adrenaline of their escape. But every few seconds, his heart would race again. Was Xira following them? Was she closing in? The darkness outside seemed to deepen with every turn they took, every moment they put between themselves and the apartment. Ava was quiet for a long while, her focus entirely on navigating the maze of streets. But finally, she spoke again, her voice more measured now. "You're going to be all right. We're getting you to the renegades. They'll know how to protect you, how to break Xira's hold." Dylan glanced at her, trying to read her face, but there was something cold about it now, an edge that hadn't been there before. "How do you know she's going to stop? How do you know she won't find us?" "She will," Ava replied, her gaze unwavering as she turned onto a quieter road. "But we're not just running anymore. You have a role to play in all of this, Dylan. You're not just some random civilian she was sent to manipulate. You're part of the plan, the real plan. And once the renegades get their hands on you, Xira won't be able to touch you anymore." Dylan frowned. "What do you mean? What plan?" Ava met his gaze, her expression hardening. "The Hyzilithians have been infiltrating Earth for decades, but they're not just here to evolve us. They're trying to create a new species, one that's fully integrated with their technology, their biology. But the renegades, we've been working to stop them from turning humanity into their puppet species. And you, Dylan, are the key to it." The words hit him like a brick. The key. That's what Xira had meant when she said he was meant for this. But Ava was telling him something different, something that made the room in his mind feel smaller, like the walls were closing in again. He wasn't just a victim of some alien experiment. He was part of a larger game, a piece in a battle that had been raging in the shadows long before he ever met Xira. "But why me?" Dylan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava's eyes softened for a moment, but the look was quickly replaced by resolve. "Because you're unique, Dylan. You're part of the first wave of humans who've been conditioned to resist the Xylithians' influence. It's a failsafe, one they never anticipated. They've been trying to evolve humanity into their image, but they didn't account for people like you, humans who can resist their influence. And you're not the only one. There are others. But you're the most important." The words felt like a revelation, and yet they only raised more questions. How could he be different from the millions of others? What made him so special? But the truth was, it didn't matter. He had already made his choice. There was no going back to the life he once knew. As they rounded a corner, Ava's eyes narrowed, and she gripped the controls tighter. "We're almost there," she said. "Once we get to the base, we'll have to move fast. Xira's going to be close. And when she catches up," she let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was clear. There was no room for failure. Dylan's breath quickened, his pulse pounding in his ears. Xira wasn't just coming after him now. She was coming after everything he had ever known. His whole life had just shifted in a single, terrifying instant, and the final reckoning was about to begin. They pulled into an alleyway, the speeder's engine sputtering to a stop. Ava turned to him, her eyes sharp with intensity. "Get ready, Dylan. This is it. And with that, the door swung open, and the storm outside swallowed them whole.